My name is Russell Lookadoo, President and Chief Strategist for HR Architecture, the HR guy for small business. My firm exists to leverage my expertise and experience so that the small business owner can achieve their vision through effective use of their teams. We have a significant election coming up in the next few days. Election Day is November 3rd, and employers need to understand the voting leave laws that apply during this election. Specifically, they need to understand their state or local laws regarding how much time employees are entitled to take off to vote, when can that time off be taken, and finally, whether or not the employees should be paid for their time off to vote. Although some employees may choose to vote by mail during this COVID-19 pandemic, others will want to cast their ballots in person, and they may have the right to do so to take time off to make that happen. Employers should not and cannot say anything that can be construed as discouraging or penalizing employees from attending the polls to vote on Election Day, even for COVID-19 safety reasons, as this could violate their state voting right laws. There is no federal law that entitles employees to take time off, but many states do offer voting leave requirements to employees in certain circumstances. For example, though, North Carolina does not have any laws regarding voting leave rights. Some states offer very specific requirements. Georgia states that employees must provide reasonable notice, and they are entitled to 2 hours of leave to vote in any municipal, state, or federal political party or primary or election for which the employee is qualified and registered to vote. Wyoming entitles employees similarly to 1 hour of paid leave unless they have 3 consecutive non-working hours to vote. Nevada defines that you must allow sufficient time to work based on the distance between the employer's place of employment, the voter's place of employment, and their designated polling place. Depending on that distance, employees get between 1 and 3 hours of paid leave if it would be difficult to get to the polls during non-working hours. Massachusetts specifically dictates that manufacturing, mechanical, and mercantile employees must be allowed to vote during the first 2 hours the polls are open, provided they provide notice to their employer. Some state laws are more ambiguous. Arkansas dictates that employers must schedule the work hours of employees on Election Day so that the employees have the right to exercise their right to franchise. Ohio provides that a reasonable amount of time must be provided. North Dakota encourages voters to establishing voting leave policy, but there's no mandate to do so. Some states, such as California and New York, require employers to post the leave rights where the employee can see it and specifying the rules. Let's talk more about California. Employers are required to provide time off as an employee needs to vote in a statewide or federal election if the employee does not have sufficient time to vote during non-working hours. Unless otherwise agreed, employees can schedule the leave at the beginning of their worksheet to be less disruptive, whichever gives the employee the most time to vote and the least amount of time to miss work. Employees in California are required to pay a maximum of 2 hours of voting time, but employees again must notify their employers at least 2 days prior to the election if they think they need time off to vote. Utah requires employers to grant time off to vote up to 2 hours unless the employee has at least 3 hours of non-working time to vote. The employer may specify the time in which the employee may take to leave the vote, but if the employee requests that the leave occur at the beginning or the end of their shift, the employer has to comply. Employers may not deduct voting time from an employee's wages. In other words, it's paid. Employees must apply for a voting leave of absence before Election Day. Typically, state laws requiring an employee to provide time off to vote stipulate that the time is only available to employees who do not have sufficient time to vote outside of working hours. Employers, therefore, could argue that states and localities that have flexible voting options, such as mail-in, mailing on weekends, or early voting periods, eliminate the need to request time off during election days. It's important that employers consult with legal counselors regarding any policies that they put in place that could restrict this. My advice is to treat early voting just like an election day. So in the states that require you to pay up to 2 or 3 hours, 2 or 3 hours to vote, I encourage you to say, all right, if you want to go now, vote early instead of on election day, I'll pay 1, 2, or 3 hours, depending on what the state law is. Now, reminder, the laws don't require that, paying for voting or allowing people off to vote during early voting periods. That's simply my advice to encourage participation in the exercise of the franchise. But there is no requirement. Typically with laws, you can do more than the law requires and not get in trouble, as long as you do that consistently with all employees across the board. Most states, if not all, prohibit employers from discipline or firing an employee who takes time off to vote, and that's very important. In some states where you pay them while they're voting, you can require evidence that they voted. And some states give you the stickers. I saw one state that's giving out pins to early voters. You can require that evidence that you voted if you're paying for it. Now let's talk about all the discussion about paying employees has to do with the non-exempt or hourly employees. If an exempt employee takes time off during the day to vote and works any during that day, you cannot deduct their pay for that voting time. In fact, for exempt employees, if they work any part of a day, or indeed any part of a week, you need to pretty much pay their salary. It's important that leadership is compliant with local laws and regulations and communicate these policies very openly, transparently, and consistently, even if not required to do so by law. As the HR guy for small business, I'm available and ready to help you comply with these laws and deal with other election-related issues in your business. It was great speaking with you, and hope to see you soon.